Hello, my dear friends. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to this episode. We're going to be talking about the 5 signs that it's time to fire your client. Later this week, we'll also talk about a couple of different signs that it's time to fire people that you've hired so that you can get a good insight into both worlds. Sometimes it's easy to be very self-focused as a freelancer consultant, coach, whatever it is that you do as a service for someone. It's easy to look at how it affects you and how you feel. And sometimes that self-centeredness can prevent you from seeing the whole picture. So in a couple of days or next week or something, I'll do that podcast as well to talk about what it's like from the client's perspective and why they may want to fire you so that you have a good understanding. Now, why do we want to have this understanding? Well, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've worked with a ton of clients. I've probably have just run the range of amazing clients to absolutely horrible nightmare clients. And there's a couple of things to understand. One, almost all client problems are preventable. They're preventable through better communication. So you having the guts to be honest and open and transparent. Number 2, they're almost always avoidable if you're willing to have a collision conversation. So to be able to call up the client and say, hey, this isn't working for me, we need to have a conversation. A lot of people who serve clients will just silently get angry, and then all of a sudden they'll pop and quit. And last year, I would say, that's not a great behavior, but your business should be fine if you're that kind of a person, where you just silently suffer, or even worse, you straight up lie to your client, you straight up lie to your client and you say, oh yeah, everything's fine. And secretly you're like working on your exit plan and you're like, screw this guy. I'm just going to milk him for money and then I'm out of here. A year ago, I'd say, that's fine. It's not ideal. I think it's personally, I think it's a horrible thing to do as a person, but I think your business wouldn't actually be that affected by it. Where we're at currently, and this episode is being recorded in the middle of the pandemic, we're still in the first order consequences of the pandemic, economically speaking. I would say the summer and maybe even the fall of next year is where we will start to see the knock-on effects, the second order consequences. And I would say many service providers are woefully unprepared in their current behaviors of operating a business for what's about to happen. Meaning, if you are the kind of person who can't have those collision conversations and you sort of just secretly stew and then quit at the last minute, or leave your clients in a lurch, or are too afraid to have the conversation to save the relationship, and your default behavior is to quit, and when you quit, your default interpretation of quitting is that you sort of won, or that you were able to eject yourself from the situation, and you aren't empathetic towards the fallout that occurs. I would say in 6 months or so, you will begin to feel the effects of heavy attrition on your business. Okay, and if you don't have a system for consistent client getting that is currently leaving you with more clients than you have time to fulfill on, then that cycle of attrition based off of behavior, because the person who would do that kind of thing also has other correlated behavioral issues that lead to attrition issues in a business, right? So the person who would do that also does other things in their own business, because it's about value systems, it's about prioritization, it's about belief of what a client is and things like that. And eventually what's going to happen is in 6 months or a year, as the second order consequences really tighten up the market, you will find that that kind of behavior is really going to hurt you. So the caveat here is I'm going to give you a bunch of signs that I think you should be aware of, but understand that these are signs. They're not, they're not the final straw. They're not the, once you see this happening, you must fire them immediately. Instead, these are the signs that things are headed towards the end of a relationship, and you can fix any relationship. A year ago, I would tell you, don't bother fixing the relationship, move on. Now, with what I'm seeing across multiple clients, what I'm seeing across my friends' companies, what we're seeing just in the world in general, I would tell you, instead of focusing on firing the client, focus first on trying to mend the relationship. And at the very least, get in the habit of leaving your clients better than you found them, even when they are horrible clients. Okay? As a general rule, I would say in the 12 years that I've run my business, I have only once left a client in the lurch. And that was actually because of very serious family, personal issues. There was nothing I could do. Otherwise, every single time that I've fired a client, okay, not quit a client, but like, this is it, I cannot work with you anymore, I'm going to fire you, I always try to leave that client with a replacement, a suggestion, and not just a suggestion of like, here's my email, I'm quitting you today, here's what you should do, bye. But literally, here's the plan, here's the sales like, I try to leave clients better off, because you never know. You never know when you might be in a position, and I think many of you are going to be in this position in 6 months to a year. If you continue on this behavior of just cutting people off, you're probably going to be in this position where those clients that you thought were nightmares all of a sudden seem pretty awesome compared to not having any clients at all. Okay, so I always try to leave my clients better off. I don't really believe that successful people talk to other successful people and you'll never get to work in the industry and blah, blah, blah. I've never found that to be true. I think most successful people, if they get fired by a freelancer, they sincerely don't care. Like, they just move on to the next person, which, that has its own things. And we'll talk about that in the other episode about what happens when you fire or a client or a freelancer quits or whatever. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the caveat that I'm giving you here is, yes, be vigilant about the client you're working with, but also be wise. It's not what it was a year ago. In a year from now, it's not going to be what it is today. I think it'll be harder in a year from now, not easier, which is why you should get stuff going now, today, rather than waiting any longer. Okay, so anyways, a long ramble. I want to make sure that you guys understand you have to stick up for yourself, but part of sticking up for yourself is not just like quietly lying that everything's fine and then quitting, or being a monster and being impossible to work with and being a diva yourself and just firing every client that you get, because that is you have to understand, clients are what pays your bills. Okay, so as long as you have that understanding, then these are the signs that you should look for. Okay, number 1 is if they don't follow your recommendations, but they demand that you generate the same results, then that's a sign you need to fire someone. I'll give you an example. We've recently been taking on certain types of clients, and one of the clients that we took on signed a contract that they would follow a certain delivery system. I don't want to give away too many details because I'm not trying to shame anybody here. The client agreed to that business model. about a month and a half into everything, decided that they no longer wanted to fulfill not on half of the business model, but on what would be the equivalent of about 80% of what made that business model work. Okay? So we had a contract. We agreed to how all of this was going to work. They said, I can't do the 80% anymore. And I said, I understand. Why? Because the pandemic. The reason that this particular client adjusted what they were able to do was because of external forces. And see, this is where a lot of freelancers get it wrong. They forget that clients are humans too. They forget that clients, look, if your business is struggling right now or you're having a hard time right now in the pandemic and it's stressful for you, I promise you it's probably 10 times more stressful for your client, because your client has to somehow figure out how to pay you, right? I mean, just think of that in and of itself is stressful. Then add on the fact that they probably have to pay other people. Or let's say you're a health coach. A really good friend of mine is a health coach, and she said, you know what, this pandemic has been making it really hard for my clients to get results. They're stress eating. The stress is causing hormonal changes. They're not getting as much sleep as they used to get, and that has its own, second order consequences. And so whatever it is you do, coaching, consulting, freelancing, whatever, your clients are probably 10 times more stressed out about everything that's going on than you are right now. So when this client in our situation came to me and said, look, I can't deliver on all that stuff, I was like, totally fine. Let's adjust our expectations. So we adjusted expectations, or at least I thought we had, because a couple of months later, she started getting very difficult to work with. Why? Because in her mind, the original contract said we would get a certain result, and she had hung on to that certain result, not truly thinking, because of stress, because of whatever reason, not keeping in mind the 80% that she was failing to deliver on, which would have helped to generate that particular result. So as a result of that, as a result of the growing toxicity and the late night emails and the very emotionally driven this and that and et cetera, I just had to fire that particular client. Okay. We had multiple conversations. We tried everything we could to work within her specific needs that were outside the terms of the contract, and this went on for 5 months. So this is probably the difference between me and you, right? You want to fire your client this weekend after working with them for 3 days. I wait. I can be patient. I give people the benefit of the doubt. You'll hear in next week's thing, when I have somebody who works with me, I'll give them 6 months to get their stuff together. A lot of people just fire after a week, right? And that's because I've seen too many times people will turn around, right? Life happens, but typically life doesn't happen, except in extreme cases, for 6 months, right? It might happen for 3 months. It might happen for 4 months. It may even happen for 5 months, but typically somewhere in between a 5 to 6 month period, things change, people come around or whatever. This particular client never came around. And so we fired her. And that is one of those situations where the client will only allow you to be as good as you can be. Or you can only be as good as the client allows you to be. There it is. It's the saying that I keep saying all the time and I forgot what it is. But you can only be as good as the client allows you to be. If you tell a client to get result XYZ, you need to do ABC, and then they come back and say, fantastic, but I will only do A, then you have to say, then I can only give you X. If they still expect XYZ when they can only deliver A, that's time to have those conversations. If the conversations don't do anything, then it's time to fire the client. Okay? Number 2. Oh, and look, again, this is one of those situations where if you don't have the conversation, then if you've never hired someone before, it was easy for me to be empathetic to this particular client for those first couple of months, because I get it. When you buy something, you buy it for a specific reason in your mind, especially if you're spending a lot of money. If, however, you make changes because you yourself are responding to life stresses, there's something about the human mind that doesn't automatically then say, oh, I guess I should change my expectations on everything. So you have to have those conversations with your clients because they're human beings, just like you're a human being. I promise you, you've probably done something like that in your own life, where you agreed to something or you bought something changed in your own life, and then you were the one who was upset and having problems, and you didn't even realize that you were the one who changed. Everything else was the same, but you were the one who changed the fundamental pieces that generated the result that you were desiring. Okay? I mean, it happens to all of us. That's not like I'm poking fun at you specifically, because I don't know who you are. This is a podcast. It goes anybody. But just generally speaking, that's a very typical behavior in human beings. Okay, number 2, the second sign is emotional instability. Here's what I mean by that. I don't care what kind of personality you have. Like, quite sincerely, you guys, I've been at this for 12 years. I could care less about the personality that you have. I don't even particularly care about your political leanings, because I think most people are politically active on social media and in opinion, but like their actual political activity of actually doing something about it is like maybe 0.01% of them actually even doing something. So I don't care what your politics are. I don't care whether you, like, every time we get on the phone, you just cuss like a sailor. I don't care. I don't care about that. What I care about is your ability to be objective about what we are doing together. Let me give you some examples. The client who emails at 2:00 in the morning because they had a random thought about something they were worrying about something that I talked to them 2 months ago, or that is part of an agreement, or like, it's that inability to control the professionalism in the communication. Here's another good example. And this happens to me a lot. So one of the things that I do is I help businesses to scale very, very quickly. A lot of people are emotionally unprepared for scale, because one of the things that happens when you scale a business is you get exposed to a lot of, like, frankly, horrible people, just like running Facebook ads on the internet and people being awful and rude and mean and like purposely trying to make you feel bad in their comments, for example. Okay, if I have a client and that client has never experienced that before, which past 12 years, hardly any of my clients have ever experienced that, right? That's why they hire me, is to help them get that going. And they absorb that and then rechannel it into something else. So, for example, and I can see clients doing this. I can watch them check their Facebook ads and then 5 minutes later send me an email about something being broken somewhere that isn't actually broken, but they just need to like get it out and da 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 da. That is a sign that we need to have a conversation about remaining professional, but also putting your focus where the focus matters. Another example is clients who don't track their own financials and then are pinging me 15 times about how they're not making any money. Well, are you tracking your financials? Because I'm tracking your financials and you're making plenty of money. Like that kind of, they lack the objectivity and the ability to use logic to think through things, and they run their business through pure emotion, which is inherently unstable. There's a really good book called The Whole Brain. I think it's called The Whole Brain Child. Really, really good book about the left side of the brain, the right side of the brain, the 4 quadrants, things like that. Highly recommend that you read that if you're a business owner, because what you need is a fully integrated brain. You need emotion and logic. Most people, when they run their business, are heavy on emotion and they don't have enough logic. For me personally, I tend to fire overly emotional clients, not because I don't like their personality, but because that behavior pattern makes getting results impossible. It makes getting results impossible, not hard, impossible. Because it is a filter that gives inaccurate information. And you cannot make good decisions about scale when you have inaccurate information. Let me give you an example. If you hate an ad because somebody commented on it, and you view that ad through the negative perception that you have, which is an emotional reaction to the ad, rather than a logical reliance on the data of whether or not that ad is working, you may, as my client, come and tell me, turn that ad off. And now we have a problem. Because now I have to explain to you, no, here, da. And even though I'm explaining it to you, again, The Whole Brain Child is such a good book to learn how to communicate with clients. You are in the emotional state, and I'm trying to explain to you in the logical state. That communication is just not going to work. You and the client you're going to miss each other. And so what happens is the client might say, okay, I see what you're saying, I understand, but not really, right? Secretly, they say, this person isn't doing what I told them to do, and I don't like it. And then if something happens in the future with that ad, they will go back in time, because the emotional side of your brain is where you store all your autobiographical information. So it's where you house memories. You will go back in time to when you hated that ad, and then the client, if you're the client, and then you'll say, see, I told you this wasn't the ad, da. And that makes getting results impossible. Absolutely impossible. Not hard, impossible. And so in the work that I do, and I think most of the people who listen to this podcast are in some kind of results-driven service, whether you're a coach, consultant, freelancer, whether you do financial stuff, whether you do business stuff, whether you do health stuff, whether you do relationship stuff. If you are responsible for getting people results and they are unable to remain emotionally balanced, what's called integrated in the brain between logic and emotion, it's a situation that nobody's going to win. Okay, and I have found of all of these points, this is the hardest one to have a conversation about, because how do you tell someone that they're emotionally unstable, that they're seeing it through the lens of emotion? I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never really found a great way to talk about it, but reassuring them as often as possible, saying, look, I understand that you're having this emotional experience, but let me walk you through the logical side of things. That tends to help in some, a little bit. But I would say this is the one that, for me personally, ends up in firing probably the most of all of these other ones. It's the most difficult to change, because what you're asking to change is someone's behavior and who they are. And if you read the book, The Whole Brain Child, you'll see not only who they are now, but who they've always been and how they were raised. I mean, that's very difficult to change. It's not a high likelihood that you're going to change that behavior in any significant way. All right, that's sign number 2. Sign number 3 is them keeping critical information from you that's required for delivering results. Okay. This one's pretty straightforward. If the client doesn't give you all the information you need to do as well as you know that you can do, then you just Have the conversation, ask for it. If they don't give it to you, let them know you can't help them. And that's pretty much all there is to that one. Pretty short and sweet. Number 4, if the client is not level appropriate for you, or they're not ready for you, it's probably a sign that you need to not work with them. So for example, if the client hires you to produce content, but they have nothing to sell, no matter how good you are at producing content, for the client, when they look at their spreadsheet, you will not be on the side of the spreadsheet that you want to be on, right? So I call them red and black employees, which is basically when you're looking at a P&L, the profit is the color black on the spreadsheet, and anything that's in the negative, which is just, an expense, an outgoing kind of situation, is red. Now, that's not how an actual P&L works, but you get the idea, right? So you want to be the client who is on the black side of things. You want to be the client who is positively producing for the client. You don't want to be on the red side of things. You don't want the client to look at you and say, well, this is just an expense. We're not actually getting anything from this. It's not growing anything. More often than not, that particular situation comes about because the client isn't ready for what you can do. If you're a relationship coach and you want to help couples build strong relationships, but the couple that you're working with is just not at all ready to take your coaching, that's not your fault, okay? If you are a business coach and you want to help someone with their financials, but their business doesn't make enough money to even pay you, much less have you do financials, that's not your fault, okay? And this is one of those scenarios where we use the word firing a client, but this is definitely one of those scenarios where you will be significantly better off if you can leave that client better off than you found them. Okay, so if you have somehow misinterpreted them and your filter wasn't in place and you've taken on someone that you now are waking up and realizing, oh my gosh, this is not who I thought they were, and they are not at the level that I need them to be at for me to be able to deliver results, then you, in my opinion, because you took them on, because your filtering system wasn't good enough, in my opinion, you have a moral obligation to help them rather than, pitching a fit and, acting like a child and just saying, well, you're not good enough for me and I'm out of here and bye and you're screwed, right? Again, that is if you go that way, that's a behavior that in about 6 to 12 months is really going to bite you in the butt when client patience and how the market works and all that kind of stuff is going to catch up to you. So this is definitely a situation where you want to leave them better off than you found them, okay? But it doesn't mean that you should stick around, okay? Because every time you have a client that isn't an ideal client, that client is taking up room that you could have used time, energy, emotional energy, etc. That client is taking up space that an ideal client could have taken up, right? So if you have the ability to serve 5 clients a month and 2 of them are bad, you need to get rid of them so that you can fill those 2 slots with good clients. All right. Next, and here's the last one, number 5, unrealistic expectations. So expectations management could be, you could probably get a master's degree in expectations management, but expectations management when it comes to clients is really about ongoing conversation, and clients will naturally balloon expectations. Okay? Look, they're paying you money. For some of them, they're paying you a lot of money. For some of them, they're paying you all of their money. And you have to understand that transactions are emotional. I don't care if it's a corporate CEO who's been in business for 40 years. I've had those clients, and I've had absolute beginner clients. The amount of money changes, but the level of emotional connection to money almost never does. So for the CEO, it might be $500,000. For the absolute beginner, it might be $5,000. But the emotional connection to money is still always there. And so you have to understand that when a client comes into your world, no matter what you say, they hear what they want to hear. And sometimes they create unrealistic expectations. One of the things that they do sometimes, clients will do sometimes, is they will bring in unrelated information when discussing relevant to you information. For example, they may say, look, it's been awesome working with you. I see that we're making this much money because of what you're doing, or I'm getting this result because of what you're doing. But I'm also over here spending, X amount of money, which is making it so that I can't spend this much money on you. And they start bringing in like all of this other stuff, right? That's outside the scope of what you're delivering. Now, which is why you need to have a very good contract to make sure that scope is clear. But that is an example of a client's expectations ballooning. Now, you could be the service provider, coach, consultant, freelancer, whatever, who just says, okay, bye, I'm done, goodbye, and just quit. That helps nobody. And if you do that, what will end up happening is that you will be affirmed in your behavior, and so you'll repeat that behavior in the future. And again, as I said, eventually you'll start getting into a game of attrition. What ends up happening, or what I would recommend that you do, is to always continue to manage the expectations. Say, okay, thank you for all of this information. I'm now going to pick out what's actually relevant to what you and I are doing. And I'm going to make it clear, here's the area of focus. Now, if that particular client comes back and says, well, I don't think that, and then they start bringing in that other stuff, then what you need to understand is that what you have on your hands is a client who is willingly having unrealistic expectations. When they willingly have unrealistic expectations, that's when it's time to fire them. Okay? And this would be a good time to leave them better off than they were before. Not in a condescending way, not in a rude way, not in a I told you way, but helping a client to understand that what they are looking for, what all of the things that they're trying to bring together, all of these extra things, all this external, they think that they're going to pay you something and make $100,000 a month and all this kind of stuff. You informing them of what it's actually going to take is, in my opinion, a good thing to do if you're going to leave for that particular reason. Okay, so that's it. Those are the 5. Number 1, they don't follow your recommendations, but they demand that you generate the same results. Number 2, emotional instability. Number 3, they keep critical information from you that's required for delivering results. Number 4, they're not level appropriate for what they've hired you for. They're not ready for you, basically. And number 5, they have unrealistic expectations. So that is it, my dear friends. I could probably make 50 more podcasts on this about dealing with clients and when to fire them. Again, I would recommend that you consider in this time right now a little bit more gratitude that you have clients, and understanding that all of the issues that I've mentioned here, even the emotional instability, they are all manageable, they're all fixable, and firing the client is not the only option. Okay, it is an option that I recommend you use once all other options have been exhausted. And then lastly, don't get into the habit of burning bridges. eventually that behavior will, because that behavior has knock-on effects. And I don't mean external knock-on effects where, oh, you can't work in that industry anymore. I mean internally it has knock-on effects. I've personally been a part of a lot of teams, and I've had my own teams as well. I've never seen, and it doesn't mean that this is like a huge population sample, but more often than not, the individuals who act in that sort of way, I've never actually seen them go on to bigger things, right? When we quit, we're like, I'm going to quit you and I'm going to go on to bigger stuff, and I'm going to quit you this way, and I'm going to, all the like the YouTube videos of people filming themselves quitting and quitting is the best. The more you reinforce that idea, to celebrate the breaking of a relationship, to celebrate a failure. I mean, if you've had to fire a client, in some ways, it's a failure of your ability to communicate, your ability to filter clients, your ability to build a business where you don't have to fire clients, right? The more you reinforce that particular idea, the more that seeps into the subconscious and manifests in subconscious driven behaviors. Things like habits, things like belief systems, things like value systems, and things like that. So the point that I'm trying to make is I've talked a lot over the years about firing clients. And I want to make sure that I give you the appropriate balance. That firing a client is a good idea when all other options have been exhausted. But to be the person who wants to work through those other options is significantly more fruitful financially, and for me at least, peace of mind wise. And as we'll see, like when I hire someone, I'll work with them for months and months and months and months, even if they're not delivering, because I just feel like that's a much more fruitful way to just be a human being. Anyway, so that's in a different podcast. So that's it, my dear friends, for this one. I hope you have an awesome day, and we'll see you in the next one.